Down in old Nova Scotia, in a beautiful valley, there's a town that's known far and wide. Along the old Avon River, she was once known so proudly as the home of the world's highest tide. Windsor town, it was booming when ships would sail in, carrying gypsum to lands far away. And the whole town would gather.
Good afternoon, folks, and welcome to nslive.tv. Today, we're here to talk about World Fish Migration Day. And joining me here in the office is FAR member Chris Mansky, who is our kind of science guy we go to, along with myself, Sonja Wood, who is the chair of the FAR group, the Fish of the Avon River. And joining us today also is a special guest, Valdy. And I'm sure you're all familiar with Valdy. He's one of Canada's #1 folk artists. He's a 2-time Juno winner, as well as great friends, family man, grandfather, and quite an icon here in Canada. So we're happy to have Valdy here with us today and lending his voice to our cause and concern for the Avon River and the need for free tidal flow. So here we are together, all concerned about the future of the Avon River and free tidal flow, because, of course, joining conjunction with Fish Migration Day, this is where our concerns lie here in Nova Scotia. So a few of the questions that we wanted to talk about and some of the concerns that we're going to discuss today are based around the causeway at the Avon River and free tidal flow, particularly for the species that need to get into both freshwater and saltwater environments. So I'm going to ask a few questions, and we'll give you some answers, and we'll see where we go with this. So, Chris, perhaps I'd like to ask you, why do you feel that we need to have fish passage at the Avon River?
Well, fish passage is crucial in a case like the Avon River, because we have fishes that need to transport themselves from the freshwater into the saltwater environment to grow up as they're hatched in the rivers, and then to complete their life cycle, they're going to migrate back up into the fresh water from the sea. And so passage to and from these rivers is really necessary if they're going to give birth to another generation. So fish passage is, right off the bat, one of the fastest eliminators of a population. If you deprive them of that single thing, you can guarantee enormous reductions in the population.
Yeah, so the importance here at the Avon River, it's that there's not just one species that needs to get into this critical habitat area, but multiple species. Now, can you tell me a bit about some of the species that perhaps live in the freshwater environment and perhaps move back out into the saltwater environment, and vice versa for other species?
Yeah, that's a good question, because the species have different needs. And for example, salmon have about a 4-year life cycle, and they spend only a few months as young fry in the rivers. And then they need to spend the majority of their lives feeding in the sea, and they will usually return on 1 or 2 migrations a year. That's salmon. But you have other species with very different behaviors and different needs. That includes the Atlantic sturgeon or the American eel. Now, interesting to point out that some of these species are threatened or endangered and have been on very high priority to attempt to recover and to mitigate the decline of them. So the different species, they have different migrational needs. Essentially, that means that the river needs to stay open for the greater part of the year.
Well, I see. And at the Avon River, that, of course, isn't happening. We don't have that diversity for the two waters to come together so that we can see the fish complete cycles of migration and spawning?
No. To date, for the last approximately 50 years, the causeway that spans the mouth of the Avon River has been fitted with nothing more than a gate system, basically doors that open and let a small portion of water out. And they're mainly operated to control flooding in the upper river if there's lots of rain or runoff.
Yeah. This is something that we've seen all across Canada, the trouble with these causeways that seem to be impeding fish passage and creating havoc and critical habitats. It's an issue out West Valdy that we hear of often, and we applaud all the groups and the individuals that stand up and fight for the protection of the wild Atlantic or the wild Pacific salmon, of course, on your side of the coast. What can you lend to this part of the conversation on our East Coast side?
The idea of putting a causeway in is it seems to me that if it's going over tidal water, whose jurisdiction is that? Is that provincial or is that now federal with the what's the Department of Fisheries?
Well, that would fall under the federal departments, of course. But in this case, you've got the freshwater side that falls under the jurisdiction of the provincial side. So you've got both governments responsible. The marine side would be more of a federal water system. And then again, like I say, on the freshwater side, we'd be dealing with the provincial side.
So it's a perfect equation to get nothing done.
That's what they like.
So many bureaucrats. You got 15 people running around with clipboards while they're building this causeway and ruining the fish passage.
Yes, indeed. And we do know that their plans are to upgrade an abattoir that doesn't work here currently right now. And you know, this river has been already sentenced to 50 years of death sentence. And to continue to leave this barrage barrier in place and to do upgrades on a river that needs free tidal flow will only offer this river another 50-year death sentence. And so the importance of seeing the removal of these barriers, I think, are paramount right across our country.
Sure. I'd like to add that the Petitcodiac River in New Brunswick is really what we should be talking about more here close to home in Nova Scotia, because in New Brunswick there is another river with another causeway. And it gives us a second point of view on how we can handle this affair. And when it comes to the abattoir or the gates of the Petitcodiac, it was determined many years ago that no system could be devised that would build you a fish passage and control your sediment budget, something they call the sediment budget. I don't like the word budget, but essentially, you have to flush out the right amount of sediment with each tide to counteract the amount of sediment that's coming in with each tide. And if you don't balance that budget, then you get a net accumulation of sediment.
And that's what we're seeing here at the Avon River Causeway. The mud buildup at this plug, when you put a barrier in like a causeway and it impedes free tidal flow, there's no flush. So when the tide comes in, you see this sediment buildup because the tide comes in and the sediment drops, of course. And now after 50 years of having this barrage barrier here at the Avon River, we can see a muddy plug that clearly has migrated down the river almost approximately 9 kilometers. So this has got to be a huge detriment to the water quality, water temperature, and easy migration.
I was going to say the water temperature probably goes up a bit too with the particles in the water like that.
Yes,
it
indeed.
would hold more.
And it's a threat. It certainly is a threat to the species that need to migrate beyond that barrier because they are sitting in that silted water, and the water temperature, of course, rising. It really adds stress on these species that are genetically coded for thousands of years to get into that saltwater environment.
Yes. Out here on the west, we have mostly the tidal flow is allowed, mainly because most of the rivers are so big that they can't put a causeway in front of them because the causeway would get washed away. The Fraser down south here, and then you have the rivers coming in at the north end of the Howe Sound up around Brackendale and Squamish. That's the winter home of the bald eagle on the west coast up there because there's so many salmon up there, and they're there because they are not impeded. And as you say, the genetic footprint gets complete. And they all head up there, and the eagles have a feast, of course. And there used to be thousands, now there's hundreds of eagles, which may tell you a little bit about what's happening with the fish out here. There are a lot of activists on the West Coast trying to control or at least reposition the farms that have been put in. They're trying to get them on closed water systems so they're not in the they're unfortunately poisoning a lot of the natural stocks. And if they were repositioned in a closed system, that trouble would be mitigated to probably to a large degree. The majority of the trouble would be removed. However, the building causeways out here, DFO would never allow anything like that, and they do have jurisdiction over all of the salt water. And you would have to have bridges and not causeways. And I think that's probably what you're looking for here, is it?
Indeed it is. We expect nothing less for the Avon River than what we've seen happen at the Petitcodiac River in New Brunswick. The minister in 2010, after a lengthy study prepared by the AMEC study team, they covered and looked at all the fixes that they could put together to fix the issue on the Petitcodiac River. They talked about reversing the fish ladders that were there, maybe installing new fish ladders, a new style of fish passage. They talked about upgrading the abadeau, and none of these things would serve well for the species that needed to get into these critical habitats. And the best resolve and the final resolve, and then what they went with, was opening a portion of the existing causeway there in 2010. They opened 500 feet of causeway and allowed free tidal flow to return to that river. And within a few years, they seen recovery of certain species that had never been up there in a 50-year period of time. So we know that free tidal flow is fixed that situation on that river, and
but that's only some of us who know. That's the problem.
Some of us that know, yes, because
right now, if I may, there's the reality of how these projects are put together. The projects are constructed based on an environmental assessment, which is conducted first. The environmental assessment puts up what it wants to achieve and its goals, and then it creates project options. So the Petitcodiac project had several options, and in the batch of options was free tidal flow, opening it up. Now here's where basically if we don't bring the topic onto the table, it doesn't get examined properly. Here in Nova Scotia, there was no project options given for an opening of the bridge. We are now looking at the province moving forward with only one project option on the table, and that is how to build an abadeau. So all we've ever really wanted was to have a 3-option proposal in front of us so that we, the taxpayers, can decide if these benefits and these detriments are worth it. And what's the real picture? But we haven't seen how all the benefits from a free tidal flow model really outweigh in so many ways. So if you look at the Petitcodiac, we see what's their recreational environment. It's gone from average and going downhill to now it's vital. You have tidal bore surfers on paddleboards riding the wave up the river. You have people gathered at the shoreline to see it. It's really a whole different ball game, and we see that all these benefits could be applied and would apply for the town of Windsor. However, the province has not put that on the table, so they don't have to fill in the numbers. They don't have to show us the data. And therefore, the project option they are showing us appears to be an improvement, but we don't know how much more of an improvement we could be facing.
Well, indeed, and the good people of New Brunswick are pretty happy with their free tidal flow and the benefits to the economic spin-off as the recovery is taking place. It doesn't only affect the species that are happy to get into that watershed, but the onslaught of the spin-off for each community that enjoys the new fresh tide coming up there and the recovery of the habitats. It's a great thing for New Brunswick. And as I was mentioning, Valdy, in 2010 they opened up 500 feet. Just last year, the federal minister, announced a $61.4 million to tear out the entire causeway on the Petitcodiac River because of the influx of spin-off, economic spin-off to the tourism and to the towns, but also the benefit to the fish. So we know that this is something that happens here on the East Coast, like the West Coast, and we've been really focusing here on the Avon River because we're coming into a time period where they're going to make a decision to either continue to block this passage, or we push forward with our effort to see free tidal flow be restored to this river for the purpose of the fish, mostly, but also the economic spin-off in the future.
Economic spin-off, and also the hereditary of it all. There's the all around the bay, there have been people harvesting all the very variety of fish over these years and doing well because the fish were kept reproducing correctly. You get the fish populations going down, it's going to affect all of the families that have been involved in that fishing, and that's going to have a detrimental tax effect on the province because there won't be the income. And it seems that millions of dollars that the feds want to put in to the Petitcodiac might be misplaced because it seems to be working well there. So leave it alone and give you the money.
Well, I don't know if the minister will be too quick to do that, but I do believe that he is understanding the situation on the Avon River. We've been sending a lot of information to the minister about our concerns and our window of opportunity to do what is right. And our group believes that right is might. And if we fix this, if we open up a portion, we're not expecting the whole causeway to be removed and to create a huge impact, but 500 feet would certainly give our species an opportunity to thrive and survive, and a chance for recovery. So I believe that no less should we be asking from our minister when we are coming into this time period of fixing up this situation.
No, and it's somewhat dire as well because, as you say, it's coming down to a deadline, and the most logical and probably the most beneficial option, as Chris says, has not been presented.
Yes. Indeed, yeah. Well,
I got a little bit of a crystal ball that we don't need to rub here to say what's going to happen in the future. What's going to happen is the province is going to come back to the table with its completed consultancy report, and the report is going to have trouble selling the idea that an abateau can be built that will balance your sediment and that will pass your fish. Remember, this was all tested and tried at the Petitcodiac, and there's not a lot of doggone difference between the two.
Well, no. In fact, the Petitcodiac and the Avon River are on a list called the 42 Rivers for Recovery by the Inner Bay of Fundy Recovery Team. And so we share the same type of macro tides, And if a fix on the Petitcodiac would be similar to the fix on the Avon River, I believe using that model that has already been put forth on the Petitcodiac would be a huge step in moving the project here along a lot quicker for the case on the Avon River Causeway situation. So let's hope that the minister will agree with us. And since we haven't even seen plans yet, the province has not even come up with a plan, and they've pushed forth with the environmental assessment, but we've not seen a plan yet here in the province as to what kind of upgrades they're going to build at the causeway, or even if it's going to serve our salmon. You know, we really need to be sure that these species get into their critical habitat. They're an endangered species. We have a very unique style of breed of Atlantic salmon here within the Inner Bay of Fundy, and it's paramount that they have safe and easy migration into their critical habitats. So, if anyone would like to add anything else,
Well, I would be very happy to see a bridge being built. I'm coming back to play in the Wolfville area in September, and I imagine the construction will be on the go by then. I would certainly prefer to see a bridge rather than a fish ladder going in.
And we'll second that.
But the fish ladders work, but they ultimately build all those stuff coming downstream, packs them up, and they're very high maintenance in order to keep them open.
Yes.
I've seen that a couple of places here. So I'm playing that Deep Roots Festival, I think, at the end of September.
Beautiful.
And I hope when I get there that all of your efforts on behalf of the fish and the fisher people we'll see a bridge going in, or at least tear out part of the existing causeway and see if 500 feet there will make a big difference.
Indeed, and we agree with that 100%. That's our mandate, and let's hope that we hear that, and when you come in September, Valdy, that we'll be able to share that good news with you.
That would be lovely. And what about petitions and whatnot to sway the politicians in Halifax?
Oh, yes. We have petitions that have already been presented in Ottawa. There's been a huge mission on the go with the group, the FAR group, and their efforts over the years. This group has been pushing government since 2002 to make some changes on this at this causeway site. And now is the time for the final decision, and we certainly hope that the federal minister is going to make the right choice for these species, not just the endangered species like the Atlantic salmon and the American eel, but for all species that need to get into that critical habitat. And also, opening free tidal flow recovers that critical habitat that might have been damaged as a result of having that barrage barrier there for 50 years. So both the species themselves and the habitat, or the residents, they refer to it as well, is equally will be equally impacted by the freshwater and the free tidal flow again. So well, Valdy, we certainly appreciated having you, your support and lending your voice to our concern out here on the East Coast, and I always enjoy having you come out to the Maritimes to play music, and it's been a few years since we've been on stage together, but it's hopefully we'll get a chance to do that again.
I would like that. Thank you, Sonja Wood. That would be lovely.
Well,
and congratulations on pushing for this change. As Chris suggested, getting the other option on the table is paramount right now in terms of if it's coming down to a decision, they have to decide between the right and the wrong as opposed to the wrong and the wrong. So that other option has to get on the table. And you've got good manpower. Good luck.
Indeed we do. Indeed we do. And for this wonderful day of World Fish Migration, we'd like to thank you all for participating with us and joining us here. And let's keep our fingers crossed that we get free tidal flow at the Avon River for all the wonderful species that need to get into their critical habitats in the freshwater environment. Thank you again for joining us, Valdy and Chris. Thank you. And folks, we hope you have a wonderful day on World Fish Migration Day. Bye for now.